really feel like
Well,
it's just for you.
We're live online.
Live from Vallejo.
Don't say anything that you don't want the CIA to know about. Always a conversation starter.
What name did the CIA log in with, do you think?
Peter, the other day, I talked to you about meaninglessness and meaning.
Yeah.
And I said, I was kind of looking at those two frameworks and seeing how I sometimes fluctuate between the two, or there's like this default one. And I said that I had this idea that meaninglessness was closer to reality. And you said, yeah, meaninglessness is closer to reality. And I want to know how you mean that, because my concept of meaninglessness is more. I don't know.
Well, the operative word there is concept.
Yeah.
You know?
So you weren't talking.
Typically, when we talk about meaning, we have some idea about what we're referring to, and that the idea is the problem. Everything is inherently meaningful as it is, but not in human terms.
Right.
So
that's why meaningless. And it's almost to say it's everything is meaningful, or everything is
inconceivably meaningful. Because everything is inconceivably real, and reality is meaningful. Reality is the sole meaning. And nothing, of course, is excluded from that meaning, because nothing's excluded from reality. But reality is not amenable to understanding in human terms, generally speaking.
Yeah.
So we have ideas of meaningful and meaningful activities or meaningless activities or meaningful anything and meaningless anythings, and these ideas are simplistic and absurd. Again, generally speaking. So anything you would qualify as meaningful is actually real. Anything you would qualify as meaningless is actually real. So they're both the same.
Yeah.
So your qualification is artificial and not accurate.
Right. Yeah, of course.
So, you want to find meaningfulness, you go out, about 3 light years in that direction, see what's happening at that exact spot, and that's as meaningful as it gets.
Yeah.
Or right here, this is meaningful as it gets. They're the same.
Mm-hmm. So somehow that idea of meaningful or meaningless has been so, it's like another one of those concepts like time or space or something.
Of course.
That is so, feels.
Of course, because it's all defined. It's all these notions are defined relative to some worldview or some context.
Yeah, right. Of course.
And if you look closely at any of these worldviews or contexts, you'll discover that the elements that they're constructed of don't actually exist.
Yeah.
So meaningful or meaningless to me or to someone, and what exactly does that mean? What is me, or what is someone? And again, we think we have answers for those, and these answers are shallow and conceptual.
It's already layered up on some belief, and then it disappears when you go, well, what is that I thought in the first place that it's meaningful to, or just when you were talking, it seemed very irrelevant and disappears.
reality has its own inherent qualities, its own inherent nature, and it's only accessible, so to speak, in terms of those actual inherent qualities, that actual inherent nature. So the more clearly you come to see reality, the more clearly you can come to understand, so to speak, the what its qualities are. And those qualities bear virtually no relationship to any qualities that humans can conceive of. So, as always, the moral of the story is, get to know reality.
Yes.
You think you're in a dentist chair. Peter, what part of the being is, I don't know how to say that, but recognizes or perceives the meaning of reality? I mean, it's obviously not the intellect. The intellect is not saying this is meaningful because of intellectual cogitations. Is it like maybe a great work of art that you stand in front of and you feel it's powerful and has meaning? Or what kind of meaning is this meaning you're talking about?
Well, it's not a kind of meaning, again, it's addressable. Even calling it meaning is ridiculous.
Yeah, it would have to be maybe a metaphor for...
Put it this way, any quality whatsoever that humans can conceive of, beauty, harmony, nobility, elegance, all of these qualities are pale shadows of the nature of reality itself. And yet, reality, the nature of reality itself does not conform to those notions. It conforms only to what it actually is in its own terms. So it embodies everything that we consider meaningfulness and beyond, and yet what that actually is to no degree a match with what we might think.
Yeah, I guess if it coincides with reality, if the so-called meaning coincides with reality, it would have to be infinite meaning.
Yeah, of course.
Which would just be beyond the pale.
It is. This is beyond the pale. This is beyond the pale.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But all the qualities that we find in our human understanding of things
Let me get it for you.
are based on present perceivable qualities. There's evidence for beauty, there's evidence for all of these things. But the evidence, the nature of the evidence, if we look very closely at it, in other words, the nature of what reality actually is, completely transcends the simplistic notions that we abstract from it as these various ideas. But it's not particularly relevant. It's a point of interest to look at it in these terms, but it's not particularly relevant to look at things in terms of meaningfulness. Or we can look very directly at the being of this experiencing that's happening right here. Here it is. It's immediately present, directly present, so its nature is being nakedly revealed right now. And we can be with that without needing to go through it second and third hand by looking at it in terms of qualities like meaningfulness or whatever other kind of, normal conceptual human qualities that we may want to apply to it. If we drop all those qualities and just be with this, it will show us what it is, and it will reveal its own inherent qualities.
I feel like sometimes when I'm nakedly with what is in reality, whichever way whichever way I look at it, whichever way I go, that what can happen after a certain amount of that experiencing is like that. What does come up is this kind of default meaninglessness, or you know, a quality which then goes kind of like there are thoughts like, what's the use, what's the point, and it just seems like it's a conceptual kind of overlay on something.
Yeah. Well, it's exactly that. It's a reaction from your habitual human point of view on the information you're getting of the nature of this. And in that context, you say, boy, I've been so wrong. My life is a joke, you know. My idea of meaningfulness is a joke. And
it is.
Everything I thought was important is an absurdity. Sure. And in that context, when you come back to the human frame of reference, after looking at this, you go, you know, God, I'm such a fool.
Sure. Yeah.
But the point is to go farther. You don't need to come back to the human frame of reference. Go farther into let's see what this is, and then in that context, then you can look back at the human frame of reference and see what it actually is.
So look at it from,
It's just a matter of being with it more, with greater duration, greater intensity, greater.
And that's what I've noticed. Like
clarity.
over the past few years, I've noticed that thing that bits and pieces I would go in, and then just kind of to be nakedly. And then that meaninglessness would come, and then I would want to pull away, you know, and then go again and again and longer, as you're saying. Yeah. And sometimes it comes in very strong waves of that, of like super meaningless. What's the point? What's the use? And it does seem relevant to what you just said, which is like this kind of deflation or crash down of like whatever worldview was being held. The same as it was.
The point is, you need to go farther.
Okay.
Go farther into it.
But there isn't that sense of what a fool I've been.
Well, whatever it
it's
is.
Just,
Okay.
Maybe how wrong I've been, you know, by the things I'm just saying, whatever, however it comes.
The quality of it is that, whatever it comes. And so you're saying just go further with that.
Because your older simplistic ideas of meaningfulness are wrong. Mm-hmm. So having them invalidated and then thinking that's a tragedy is a fallacy. Having them invalidated is the first step, but the second step is to go farther and see, okay, what's the actual meaningfulness? Since that isn't it.
Yeah, right.
Since what I thought was meaningful is actually meaningless, then where does that leave me? Is it actually meaningless, or what is this? What is this? Yeah. What is this actually? And is meaningfulness even a relevant category? You know, the nature of this exists in its own nature, in its own qualities, in its own categories, so to speak, although you can't necessarily call them categories and qualities, but let's just use those words. And you have to discover what that is directly. To see what's really going on here, to see what you really are, to see what this really is. And then in that context, you can, whether or not meaningfulness is relevant will become immediately apparent and will be a non-issue.
So if I still get sort of, it seems like as a default that meaninglessness keeps happening, and I'm interested, maybe I can also just play with that in itself and see what that is, what quality that has, or
you can try that, or you can try, you can say, maybe it's meaningless, but it's still here. It didn't it's not nothing, so what is it?
Okay.
And so you kind of abandon meaningfulness or meaninglessness as a relevant category. Maybe it is meaningless. But that doesn't erase everything.
Yeah.
That doesn't eradicate being.
Yeah.
So there's something here.
Yeah, right.
There's something here. There is reality.
Right.
There is reality, it's right here.
Right.
And if it's meaningless, okay, fine, but is that the end of the investigation?
Right.
Is that the final?
Because it deadens something. Again, it slaps something on this.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So just, yeah.
It's always, what is this? What is this?
Yeah.
This is real. This is actual here. This is actual. But what is it? It's not what you're used to thinking it is.
That's, yeah.
And until you see what it actually is, you will be in insanity, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Which is fine, because that's a perfectly appropriate condition to be in at a certain condition of spiritual maturity.
Sure.
But then when you get to a point where you're beginning to move into this, address this more actually as it actually is, then that becomes relevant.
Yeah.
And the only effective way to really approach this as it is to abandon qualities, abandon qualitative analysis, abandon seeing it, trying to see it as this, as that. In other words, you can't come to it with a checklist of, okay, what's meaningful, what's good, what's bad, any arbitrary list of human qualities. If you come with this sort of as a shopping list and hold it up to reality and say, okay, let me find these things here, you're biasing your investigation, because you'll be looking at this in terms of your preconceptions.
Sure. That's right. And sometimes, I wouldn't even know, meaninglessness or not. It might be subliminal or trickier, and then it becomes, and then something, it's like something suspicious, like I'm not really in touch or in contact, there's some layer. But, yeah.
But anytime you're in any kind of conceptual categories, you're in imagination.
Yeah, right. Of course.
Which is real as imagination, but it's not real as what is being imagined.
Yeah.
And basically all human concepts, period, inclusive, are fantasies. All. This is not a fantasy. This is real. But again, when we approach this outside of the context of these categories, lo and behold, there's an astounding richness, there's an astounding presence, there's an astounding diversity of nuance, and we don't have words for it because it's not conceptual. Mm-hmm. So we're not. It's not like we lose anything by letting go of these categories. On the contrary, we get to approach and gain contact with what's actually present. That is at best only masked by our trying to categorize it erroneously, as we do. We discover all the shades of gray, all the shades of the rainbow spectrum of this astounding beingness that are present. Say there's 10,000 words in the language or whatever, just some arbitrary number. There's 10,000 words. There's literally an infinite range of qualities here. So there's all these things that are in between the words. So this word refers to this word refers to this word refers to this. Yeah, but what's here? Mm-hmm. There's no word for it, but here it is. And so by compartmentalizing our approach to this, to our experience, we blind ourselves to whole ranges of what it actually is. It's like if you think there's just, 8 colors, red, orange, yellow, and you point to the spectrum. What color is that? Well, it's red. What's that one? Well, it's yellow. It's like, yeah, but there's just infinite reds, infinite yellows, infinite oranges. And it's completely arbitrary to say where does red stop and orange begin,
Right.
I mean, that's a very gross example, but our experience is like that. Our experience is nuanced. We have these, look at the range of verbs, to do, to go, to see, to think, to talk, so there's big chunks of possible actions. And then you look at the dynamism of your experience, and this dynamism is all basically would be the equivalent of verbish quality, right? And again, it's an infinite range, it's an infinite spectrum of dynamism that completely, by its subtlety and nuance and astounding quality, completely just renders these simplistic, heavy-handed, gross actions that we can imagine in our conceptually, it renders them completely absurd. Look at all this nuances.
I don't think we see things that we don't have words for.
Well, it's not that we don't see them. We have conceptual blinders. It's a kind of a denial. Yeah.
We fast forward over things
Yeah,
we don't have a word for.
I think so.
There's something we have a word for. There's a mantle. There's a ceiling. There might be a lot in between, but I just jump to the next thing that I can understand.
There's billions, maybe billions of, let's call them pixels of visual information present in your visual field, and you have names for
6 of them.
Whatever, 6 of them, a dozen of them, 100 of them, 1,000 of them, and there's literally billions, or infinite. And each of those is different in the next instant. Because it's all, this experience is astoundingly dynamic and impermanent. So again, when you look at your field of vision, do you see a dozen or 100 objects, or do you see a field of astounding infinite dynamism, nuance? And the same, of course, with all of our experience. And again, even categorizing our experience into a field of vision, a field of thought, a field of sensation, blah, 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 is completely arbitrary. And it's really just a matter of noticing. To put it very simply, it's just a matter of noticing the full extent of our experience, the full field of what our experience actually is, to the extent it's meaningful to call it a field. Take the blinders off. And it's here. It's not like we need to get something else, get something new that isn't already present. We just need to notice it.
I know there's something the other day, it wasn't earth-shaking, but it startled me for some reason. I was looking at myself, which is basically a collage of a whole lot of little particles of visual. It's almost like a Picasso cubist painting, the side of my face in the mirror and the way I feel this morning and whether the shoulders pinching, all of this together. So I was looking at this mass that I call myself, and I was also sort of phasing out and looking at what else is around, which is a whole lot of energy and a lot of stuff. And all of a sudden my breath stopped. That happens when you concentrate. All of a sudden, whoosh, and I realized that there's no dividing line between these two.
Right.
In other words, this collage of Dean here, and then all these energies and everything around it are not two different things. Dean isn't trying to sort out these energies. There's no dividing line. It's just like the Sargasso Sea, and here's a little piece of seaweed, which is Dean, and the rest is the ocean. Yeah. And a little later I started breathing again, but that really stopped me for a while. And even though I could have said that theoretically before, but the question is, why am I not free? Why have I not seen it? Now I've seen what is wrong with this picture? I should have.
Are you not free?
Well, when you ask.
When you look for the evidence of why you're not free and its context in the same way you look for Dean and its context, and see what you find.
Okay, I'll do that. I'll go back to the Sargasso Sea and look at that. But looking at why I'm not free is prejudicing the output already, though.
But looking at Dean, it's okay if you include the not Dean, because then you're still looking at the full field. So why you're not free is good. Okay, so look at your non-freeness, whatever.
No,
for you to say you're not free, that means there's some experiential evidence that you're calling not free.
Yeah.
But that's not the entirety of your experience. There's going to be a whole range of whatever that's somehow outside of that set or that grouping, and then look at that similar relationship.
No, I hear you. I got a free willy. This guy's.
Because liberation, realization, is not a new condition. It's simply the perception, the accurate and clear perception of what is and has always been the case. It's the perception of that that's liberating, not the establishment of some new relationship within it.
Yeah.
So again, bondage is defined into existence. Non-liberation is defined into existence. Samsara is defined into existence. And eliminating, since it's not really there, you don't need to eliminate it. You just need to see that it's not actually there by seeing what is actually there. Which in this case means seeing the full context, seeing the full field. Because again, bondage exists in a context of non-bondage, and when you find it the same thing, you discover what it actually is, and then in that context you can see, is that meaningful to designate that bondage or not, and you will say no.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I'm glad I asked.
The evidence is all right here. I mean, that's the wonder of it. That's the marvel. It's all right here. This is the laboratory right here. Everything whatsoever is right here. So it's all accessible. It's not like you need to go somewhere else and get something you don't already have. You just need to see it. And seeing it, you are seeing it. You just need to let yourself know that you're seeing it. Let yourself see that you're seeing it. I mean, of course, we get tripped up in our descriptions as usual.
Somebody was seeing that. Somebody was seeing the Dean, and somebody was seeing the not Dean. There was a third unknown quantity there.
So yeah, cool. So what's up with that?
Right. Well, that's an infinite regress if I get into that. I know where that is.
Well, seeing is slippery because, again, it's very easy to fall into subtle conceptualizations that are held to be factual when there's not really a basis for them. One of which is that there's a seer. Mm-hmm. There is seeing. There's manifestly seeing, and so it's a hair's breadth from the seeing to say, oh, so I am seeing, or so there is some property or principle seeing. Why? Why does there have to be? Can't there just be seeing? Why impose some kind of logical structure on it that says if there's seeing, there must be something doing it? Says who?
Seems more comfortable.
Prove it. Does it?
Well,
it seems a lot less comfortable to me.
It's uncomfortable when I check in with it, right? But it seems like, because that's that habit.
Sure, it's a habit.
Then it seems like, oh, I know who I am, and I'm contained, and I know what's going on,
Sure.
So it seems more like,
Well, yeah, relative to the habitual human worldview, exploring this boundarylessness and this nounlessness and this verblessness and this seerlessness can be precarious.
Mm-hmm.
But it's only the transition that's iffy. having made the transition from that context, you will look back on your human frame of reference and go, yuck.
Yeah, for sure.
Clean up this smelly mess, somebody.
Yeah. It's already,
Who left this
it's already
garbage
too
lying
difficult
around?
sometimes to go on that trip, the usual trip, and go and then feel like it's disgusting and I don't want it, like, or it's too annoying, or,
Mm-hmm.
it's changing the comfortability, I guess, the comfortability with it, it's,
Well, the transition is definitely iffy. It's potentially uncomfortable. It's potentially catastrophic. It's potentially a crisis. Or not. It depends on your nature and your karma, your fortune. And some people sort of go, and other people end up in a mental institution for the rest of their life.
I can call you from there.
Not collect.
Bring chai once a week. Bring chai once a week, please. I'm going through withdrawal on top of everything else.
There's an implicit, from listening to this, it seems to be, and I know this isn't your, at least I think this isn't your intent, there's an implicit concept that knowing and the real world is not either good or even here, but that you can't say it's good or bad, and it is here.
Right.
So it's not like something that you have to get rid of. It's.
I'm not following what you're referring to. We're getting rid of what? Of the worldview, you mean?
Yeah, it seems like.
Oh, yeah.
It seems, just from listening to this, I think dispassionately, it seemed like there's a good place to be and a bad place to be.
Oh, no, I don't mean that in the least.
Okay, no, I mean that was.
It's like. It's kind of like, it's a lot like toilet training.
Yeah.
When you're an infant, diapers are a good thing. Diapers are a good place to be. But you reach a certain point in your functionality when you begin to outgrow diapers. And at that point,
no more shitting.
and there's a transition involved. It's not that diapers are bad or non-diapers is good. It's just that at a certain point of unfoldment, it becomes appropriate to leave diapers behind.
Right.
And likewise, at a certain point of spiritual unfoldment, spiritual maturity, it becomes appropriate to leave these worldviews that we cling to desperately and we inhabit out of a sense of security behind. Mm-hmm. And the transition can be challenging because it's a change, a radical change of paradigm, or you could say a radical loss of paradigm.
Yeah. Sometimes I make a mess in my pants, the same as between diaper training. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, but there's no value judgment in it whatsoever.
Sure.
It's just a matter of what's appropriate in your particular range of maturity.
Right.
And it's not better to be, call it more mature than to be less mature. It's just, an acorn's an acorn, an acorn's an acorn, and then at some point it sprouts, and the sprout isn't better or worse than the acorn isn't better or worse than the sprout, but at some point the acorn sprouts. And at that point it's appropriate for it to be a sprout. If it tried to be an acorn, it would have to kill itself, right?
But it's this that there could be like that struggle or conflict or pain, in the transition, or
friction's a lot of friction.
So it can seem like the other thing is better, without having that pain or that conflict. And,
It's like being an adolescent.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Adolescence is a classic time of friction and striving. You're on the one hand, you're familiar with childhood. On the other hand, you're trying to, your inner forces, your natural maturing life force is driving you to different modes of functioning than childish modes of functioning and childish dependencies. And it's a frictional time. It's a difficult time of making this kind of a transition. Right? But it's not that adults are better than children. It's just it's right. Children are right for children. When you're at a certain level of development, being a child is exactly appropriate. Sure. Taking a child and expecting him to be an adult, taking him and say, okay, be a CEO of this company right now, it's an absurdity. It's laughable. And vice versa.
True. Yeah.
And vice versa.
Sure.
Things are what they are, but, you know, I mean, it's difficult because we don't really have, in our culture, probably in most cultures, we don't really have a clear model of this process of maturing. We're all very familiar, I mean, all cultures, culturally, we're very familiar with, you know, childhood, adolescence, adulthood, old agehood, you know, as sort of the stages of life, but we don't have a clear understanding of the stages of spiritual life.
Yeah.
And the fact is that there is such a thing as spiritual unfoldment, and and at a certain point, individuals find themselves at this kind of a transition where they are basically outgrowing their human framework, and they're growing into a whole different relationship with the reality of their being. And it seems to be a relatively rare thing these days, anyway. Who knows? And it's not clearly understood or incorporated, and it's included in this vague rubric of spirituality, which is very nebulous and a hodgepodge, not particularly coherent.
Yeah.
But the fact is that this is a natural event.
Yeah.
That individuals at a certain point in their unfoldment naturally find themselves gravitating to.
Yeah.
And then there's all of these various more or less institutionalized vehicles, sort of social midwifery that's intended to kind of help the process along, or more often exploit it.
Yeah.
And then you have all of these religions and spiritual paths and what have you, gurus and what all. But it's not really understood. It's not generally clearly understood what is going on there.
Peter, I've been noticing lately that, in looking at certain things that happen or whatever, I see there's no downside. Just in the sense that, in the past I probably would have been looking for the downside of things, and I'm seeing more and more that there is no downside in anything.
I've been struck recently by the fun of this search. Somebody lent me a series of Swedish mystery books, detective mysteries, and I'm on my 6th or something now, and it's fun. The mystery is fun, and the search, in retrospect, was really fun.
It's the great adventure. It's really it is the greatest human adventure, is this investigation into the big picture.
But before I didn't notice it was fun. But now I mean, it's not even looking back. It's now is fun, as well as looking back. But it's now is fun. And I didn't expect that. I don't know what I expected, but I didn't expect fun.
Yeah, it's fun. We have, the greatest possible toy is right here. The greatest possible puzzle is right here. The greatest possible work of art is right here. Totally accessible, totally available to enjoy, explore, play with. And what could be more fun?
And it's completely unpredictable, which is also exciting.
Yeah.
So, Peter, maybe could you say something about dimensionality? Because I have, sort of my regular old dimensionality, and then I just kind of go into this, and sometimes I feel it'd be nice to have some micro-dimension or some other realm.
Well, if you need micro-dimensionality, you could always just dream it up.
Uh-huh.
Pick it up. I mean, I think this is a pretty eloquent way of talking about dimensionality. There's infinite dimensionality, and the infinite dimensionality has infinite dimensionality. Infinite dimensionality has the power of infinite dimensionality. So you can go anywhere in that. And yet these dimensions can also be very small. They can be very contained. They can be very open. They can be, all conceivable. This can be in any conceivable relationship with itself. Well, I should say it is in any conceivable relationship with itself. And you can become aware of that. You can sort of enter into seeing it from that mode or from that viewpoint. Including customary human dimensionalities, that those are very easily accessible, but they aren't exclusive. The actual dimension of the actual dimensionality of consciousness, the actual dimensionality of experience, is literally infinite dimensional.
Maybe that's part of that process of integration too. The more time you spend in that other realm,
Yeah.
the more familiar you, maybe
Yeah, of course.
not in any sort of tangible sense necessarily.
Right. Yeah, certainly.
But
I mean,
I've noticed lately eating food even
Yeah.
that there is, there's a sort of an energetic thing that happens. It's not just tasting things, but it is a sort of other.
Yeah, there's infinite dimensionality to all experience. So any and all experience has infinite aspects, and we tend to gravitate or resonate through various sets of these aspects by our inclination or whatever, or we get moved into exploring more of them or pushing the envelope or whatever, But and initially stumbling upon this, it can be a little daunting. It can be a little, you can feel swamped or just like wow, big flash, wow, too much information kind of thing, and it just is all sort of very, very fuzzy and nebulous. But again, integration, as you become more and more familiar with this open-endedness, then you can explore it and exploit it a little more deliberately without getting swamped by it and without and learning a more sophisticatedly, not needing to collapse it down to anything. Because at first, when we have a more immature approach or more naive approach, we go into these funny spaces and we try and get a handle on them and collapse them down to something. But as we become more mature in dealing with these energies, these dimensions, we let them be what they are more open-endedly, which allows them to be more fluid and more ambiguous and more spinning off into more of themselves, others of themselves, and so on and so forth. Again, language kind of.
Well, I think a lot of my childhood there was a lot of disembodiment, and I didn't associate necessarily a good experience. It was more of an escape from suffering or pain.
Yeah, sure.
So I have this state that is sort of like astronauts, where they're just in outer space and they can't actually project themselves anywhere without having something to push against.
Right.
So there's just this sort of limbo floating that happens a lot, where I'm sort of at a loss for words, or there is nothing, to push against to get back to something else that might be recognizable or. I tend to want to have, some tangible things. I'm not necessarily that comfortable with just being in that,
Well, you may have developed a resonance with that kind of a condition at some point. But even a condition like that is actually open dimensional. It's actually not anything in particular.
Right.
And so it's actually vastly more than it is, than it seems.
Yes.
So it itself is a doorway to more infinite dimensionality. So you're never actually stuck or stranded anywhere, even if it seems to be, you think you are.
Yeah.
Because again, that's a result of collapsing it down. Grabbing it as being a certain way.
Well, I think that sometimes I associate that state with a kind of a helplessness or a sense of that there's nothing more I can do here.
Right. Sure.
I need to get some of that warp speed going onto planet.
Yeah, dimensionality is a really good ingress for inquiry, for noticing.
Yeah.
Just notice how any experience has vast and subtle dimensions, and it's very hard to pin down what anything is. Eating is a good example. You take a taste of something, and the taste is clearly there, but then experience what the experience actually is, and it's just this astounding openness, this kaleidoscope of possibilities and implications and ambiguities and And again, it tends not to converge and resolve itself down to something simple, but on the contrary, to just disperse and just include all sorts of implications and nuances and subtleties and ambiguities, and each of which implies even more of the same. It's like so every experience is just an endless vehicle for opening. You know, if you let yourself notice what experiences actually are in real time.
Yeah, I think that I have this subtle tendency to want to reach a destination.
Sure. Yeah.
You know, out there that there must be something.
Yeah,
you know,
sure.
that I'll be.
Yeah.
I mean, just to open beyond that possibility to the point that we can just keep going endlessly is mind blowing.
It is mind-blowing. But again, we tend to approach things in terms of the way we have approached them, and it's very typical and simplistic to have that notion of a destination. Oh, that's a nice. The destination is a result, is a goal, and so we have this subliminal inclination to relate that way strategically to this, but then we discover as we mature that that's not. That there are alternatives, and the alternatives are actually more viable and more real, more actual, and a lot more interesting than a simple result, a simple goal. And we discover that goals don't exist.
Well, I think some of that's come from simplistic spiritual notions that I've been exposed to as well.
Simplistic spiritual notions and simplistic material notions, I mean, they echo each other and resonate.
They're made by simplistic material.
Yeah. Well, points of view.
Yeah.
And they're nice. It's nice to have a simple version, a simple view of things where this works with this and really leads to that. I mean, wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah. It's like a recipe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the more we investigate
take a pinch of Peter Brown.
The more we investigate our experience, the more we discover that all experience is less like any experience is less like a thing or an object than it is like a doorway, which leads to something else. So experiences, things, events don't tend to collapse to finality. On the contrary, they tend to open to implication and possibility. So, anything across the board. And so we discover that the nature of this actually is an openness, rather than a tendency, a convergence, rather than a tendency to converge down to entities, finite beings, finite situations, finite conditions. On the contrary, anything you find tends to open and dissipate and spread out and imply universes.
Right. And in fact, one would be somewhat suspicious if things did seem to converge.
Well, it turns out not to be the case.
Right.
It turns out not to be the case. And so as we get more and more experience of this fact, as we get more and more experiential evidence that this is how this actually is, then we develop more mature relationships to it in terms of our strategizing, such as it is, or our approach to our being and our experience in our life.
I was thinking of what you were saying, trying to find the seer, whether it's straight up and down seeing, or whether there's a seer. And I was doing very poorly finding the seer. So seeing is probably what's happening. But suddenly this intuition came up, and what it was saying is there's a terrible tyranny of the science of perspective and the vanishing point.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that just superimposed. I mean, if somebody wrote a doctor's thesis on the worldview as it was contrived and manipulated by the science of the vanishing point in art, it does just what you're saying. Instead of open-ended, it all comes to a point, and that point is the self over there and the self here, and they're the same. Anyway, that just jumped at me, and I can't get out of it. It's kind of a rational thought. But the tyranny of the vanishing point is terrible. People like Paul Klee and Miro and Juan Miro and those who do these dreamlike scapes, they've gone back to primitive art. They leave the vanishing point out of there. That's like a dream, and I'm sure that's more like reality. But the vanishing point assumes that we know everything in the continuum between here and infinity, and we don't.
Right.
So that the tyranny of the vanishing point is almost bondage itself from one point of view. I mean, that's really a dimensionality that there's a problem. But the basic point was, I don't see a seer, I just see seeing.
But again, and again, even seeing isn't really seeing. There's no seeing either. So, but you can use that as a tool to explore the seer. Collapse that down to the seeing, and then and there isn't. And what if there isn't seeing? Then what? Then where are you?
Back to the drawing board.
No, it's no drawing board.
Okay.
Some of my experience with this exploration, or whatever you call it, is it's almost like there's a tendency to think about doing it or something, but it's like the closer I get to this, it's like the way I've always experienced the world, but I've had this like lifetime of trying to make it fit into these categories and ways of being, and being frustrated that I can't, and that I can't. So it's almost like allowing it to be the way it is.
Yeah, exactly.
That sounds kind of silly, doesn't
No,
it?
but
That's
related to the point. Just let it be what it is. Quit trying to jam a square peg into a round hole.
Yeah.
Hasn't worked yet, so.
Huge sigh of relief.
And we're load off. Just let it be what it is.
It strikes me, getting back to what Dean was saying, was that there is a seer, but the seer is blind. I mean, because it can't see what has to be seen. Or if see is a wrong word, but I mean, I exist in some form or other, and the eye can't see what has to be seen. So the eye is blind.
Right.
I guess that's what I'm convoluted, but it's like.
Well, the eye is blind because it's not a subject; it's an object.
It's an object, right?
And when you look for the subject,
yeah.
it begins to get very trippy. Our personalities and our psychic structures and all that turn out to be objects, just like this room is an object.
Mm-hmm.
They're energetic presences and experience, but they aren't you any more or less than this room is you. So it's not that there is no personality, there is no you, it's just that you isn't you. You is just an object in your experience. And that what's your experience then? And then that's where we starts getting real.
Well, it's no different to any other experience that we have all the time.
Of course.
So, which is exactly how we experience other things. We actually have that same.
Whenever there's an experience, it seems like it requires some kind of change for anything to show up at all. And then that change seems like it's like a trailing off to do with time and memory or something. So it already seems like even with that direct experience, it's already can't be real, except it's real as that, but it seems seems frustratingly I don't know, like dreamlike or fantasy-like, even
Yeah, certainly.
direct perception.
Yeah, direct perception is ultimately ambiguous, and yet that the ambiguity of direct perception instantaneously and spontaneously spins off inconceivable implications. And typically, the mind latches onto the implications and builds something out of them. But the implications are just like sparks being given off by this indeterminacy at the actual core of the actual event, and yet that's there too. But it's there as an indeterminacy, which spins off and implies determinacies that the mind then latches onto. But it's all, but that entire gestalt, functional gestalt, is this. You know, and without parts. It's not like the ambiguity is here and then there's a spinning off, it's another part, and the grabbing is another part. It's just its nature that it can be meaningful to talk about it in those terms to some extent. You know, one way I put it is that this is other than itself.
Mm-hmm.
It's the nature of what this is to be other than itself, right now, right here. And so it is itself and it is other than itself as an aspect of it being itself. Very strange. And yet observable.
Right. So it's like the infinity.
Yeah, infinity. Yeah, infinity is immediately present and obvious and observable.
And yet it appears other than itself. Like it can appear finite, what you're saying.
Yeah, certainly.
Or, or for, at least from a certain, like worldview,
Sure. You know, it depends how coherently you fixate on some of the implications, the specific implications, and if you use them to construct a more or less consistent edifice conceptually, then all of a sudden you have a worldview, and you have objects. That's how we make objects. That's how we make entities. That's how we make situations, and we do it instantaneously and with incredible degree of enterprise.
And all those implications are just
They're
flashes.
They're floating around the inherent ambiguity, which is at the core of the real-time experience.
When you say what is seeing, or the inquiry into seeing is really the inquiry into what is experience as a whole, is it not?
Absolutely.
Just what is experience?
Absolutely.
So
That's the big question.
Right.
Well, experience is a very shabby word, really, isn't it?
It is.
Very poor approximation.
A pitiful designation for the divine.
But seeing walks you into just one of the senses, and
Sure.
even the senses is very constraining.
Yeah, and even experience locks you into a whole subtle,
Right.
gestalt of concepts.
As you find more, you can add on to that.
Yeah.
That's a container.
It's a little more,
for whatever you may find.
Yeah.
It's back to experience.
It's pretty general purpose.
Seeing is limiting.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why I like God, because it's the least deterministic phrase you can put on it. So.
There must be some use.
Pregnant with implication, but of what? And yet it somehow captures the import.
I come from a background where God is a term like fascism. It's one of those things.
Evil,
you don't go there.
Yeah, right.
It's sort of like, it's loaded for me.
Yeah. Well, that's why it's such a fun term, because it is so loaded, but it's so completely meaningless.
Yeah, it is completely
It's a flag.
meaningless.
It's a flag that people take up and wave, and they don't know what it represents at all.
Do you believe in God? Is a hilarious question.
Yeah, I wonder whoever came up with that term at the beginning.
So I believe I get or experience that sense of animus, sense of isness, and I'm also aware of layers of subtle, fearful conditioning.
Mm-hmm, sure.
And there's the wisdom, I use the word wisdom because it seems like accurate to want to release or even get rid of those layers of fearful conditioning. And to be more proactive about it, because it seems like noticing animus is, there's something in it for a few moments, but then from that place of animus I can see a lattice work.
Okay.
So I'm just with that sense, but then if I start to become concerned or preoccupied about the conditioning,
Right.
that has its own thing.
Right.
So I'm looking for, and then in the realm of spiritual practice, there are all these strategies.
Right.
Some more complex systems of strategy, and some systems of no strategy.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been grappling with that as I sit with you, and I can feel that sense of stillness, and then I feel the fearfulness.
Mm-hmm.
There's almost something that would like you to help me find a way more into the stillness, yet also in a way that doesn't just leave the conditioning, because it's
Okay.
Yeah.
What I recommend is not to take on the conditioning in its own terms. In other words, rather than battling the conditioning or fighting it or trying to invalidate it or trying to, argue it out of existence or something like that, what I recommend is bypassing it altogether. And the way I recommend doing that is to find a portion of your experience that is completely neutral and also relatively undefined.
Mm-hmm.
It can be, background noises, or not necessarily sensory. It can be some, experience of some mental textures or something that you don't, that's not completely not loaded for you,
Right.
that's not threatening, that you don't have beliefs about or beliefs for or against. It's just a neutral, undefined, an unidentified flying experience kind of thing. So find a portion of the experience that's like that, and then be with that quality immediately, to the extent you can. I don't mean like fixating on it or locking your attention on it. Just sort of explore in that realm of texture, experiential texture, in the context of the sense of being, and just feel that. And if you find a sort of a relatively neutral experience, it should be relatively non-threatening and shouldn't kick in the sort of the fears and the grasping kinds of mechanisms so much. And just playing with that experience, you'll discover that, I get a little more general about it. In general, a vast portion of our experience is happening in real time outside of our belief systems. There's vast areas of our experience that we typically deny or in censorship. We typically just don't even let ourselves or notice they're happening. But just all kinds of nebulous, weird little subtle vibes and subtle moods and subtle sounds and subtle feelings and stuff that we don't have words for them. They aren't part of our description at all. They aren't part of our narration. They aren't part of our game structure. But they're there. And if we can let ourselves, proactively go to those portions of our experience and experience them, this accomplishes two things. Number one, we're outside of our belief structure without needing to dismantle it. And number two, we're discovering directly and experientially that we're more than we think we are, in a way that ideally is not threatening. It won't necessarily send up a lot of red flags and make a lot of sort of fear reactions and stuff like that. So I would recommend trying to play around with your experience in some ways like that and see if you can stumble on some things that are interesting and possibly valuable. Mm. Does that make sense for you at all? Resonate for you at all?
When I listen from my heart, it resonates. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because my first listening was listening from the mind, mm-hmm. and the mind is impatient, right? And it has another opinion, right? Yeah, for sure. When I listen from my heart, it's like yeah. Yeah.
We talk about heart, and it's to me that means to be with things more texturally, to be with things more sensual isn't the right word, more the word that comes to my mind is texturally, but I don't know what that means to you, but there's a way of sort of being with the lusciousness of and the fullness of experience very directly. Yeah. And again, we can be with any aspect of our experience in that context, to be with it texturally, to be with it sort of sensually, mm-hmm. even if it's not a sensual experience per se, but just to be with it with that kind of implication, just sort of to luxuriate in it, to bathe in it, to wallow in it, whatever. I mean, and again, to find these portions of our experience that we don't usually we don't usually pay much attention to because they're not part of our narration. We don't have words for them. We aren't using them to, as pointers in our winning and losing, the me game kind of thing. If you know what I mean.
I do.
Because as we discover these parts of our experience that are outside of our game structure, we discover very directly and experientially that we are outside of our belief system, and the belief system gets relatively diminished in importance without needing to take it on head on, without needing to dismantle it, without needing to challenge it, i.e. without needing to make it feel threatened and then kick in, grab on and send up its defenses kind of thing. Why don't we take a little break? We'll be back in 5 or 10 minutes. We're live again. We're live. Beautiful downtown Vallejo.
It really was 5 or 10 minutes.
Yeah.
That's frightening, John.
Not the usual 20.
I guess we're on good behavior tonight. Mm-hmm.
That last discussion got me thinking about the word seeing.
Mm-hmm.
Use seeing like as one of the senses. Well, you also use it as a kind of defining of things, like I see your point of view, or I see what you mean, or now I see it, like an idea, conceptually, like as a way of creating something solid that you can hold. And somehow we give it some reality. I mean, we think that seeing, it seems like that's kind of the definition of something real, even though we have all these other ways that we experience. Why is that? I mean, it doesn't seem like seeing that it should have this primacy of I mean, somehow things seem more real, visually, or the way we think of seeing in terms of we could use it as kind of a euphemism for knowing.
Yeah, I think it has that disproportionate value in our symbol system because we're primarily visually based creatures in terms of the emphasis of our senses, or well, visually and mentally. Although since we don't usually think of mentality as a sense, it doesn't come out so much. But I think, like, for example, if we were dogs, maybe we'd say, I smell what you mean. I really smell you, man. Who knows?
But you'd be sniffing first.
So Peter, it is quite hard to dislodge this linear notion of aging.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, in the sense that there are so many different, you know, movements going on, but this is sort of a very primal parent thing that is very embedded in us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's no need to dislodge it or deny it, just see what it actually is. And again, you'll discover that it is not a simple thing. It itself is a profound ambiguity and a profound, you know, resonance of just inconceivable aspect.
Yeah, far more complex than we imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is. And we can't say what it is definitively from within any context at all.
Right.
I mean, we can see the evidence of it and we can indicate the phenomena, but we can't really say what it is or what it imports or what, in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, this interesting phenomena that all energy systems seem to have a kind of a lifespan. You know, they seem to become generated and then develop and then somehow, you know, have their existence and then they dissipate or move or develop it or spread into other things or whatever, right? I mean, all energy systems do this, all life forms do this, and all. But what does it mean and how does it work and what's actually going on, of course, is, you know, there's no way to get a handle on that. There's no way to pin it down. And yet we are participating in it and we are also beyond it. Because even as this phenomena is going on, it's going on in the context of the being of the present moment, which does not age, which does not develop, which is always the same. You know, so it's a very interesting complexity and subtlety to this system.
And the linearities really are fantasy anyway.
Right?
Just
Of course.
complete.
Of course. And you wake up some mornings and you feel really vibrant and vital and healthy, and all of a sudden you're 10 years younger, and you wake up another morning, you know, and all of a sudden you're at death's door. Right?
They've been doing that for a good 30 or
Well,
40
yeah,
years.
yeah, that's what I'm saying. You know. That's how it is. Entropy, the way specific forms tend to deteriorate or tend to, you know, have a development. It's very interesting, and all forms do that. You know, it's fascinating that should be the case. And yet the system, the context, never gains or loses anything. As forms fall apart, the system doesn't lose anything. As new forms come into being, the system doesn't gain anything. And most fundamentally, there's nothing but the system. So the forms are just aspects of the system. The forms are just aspects of the context.
Well, and the forms are the system.
Yeah. So you will die. You will die, but you never die.
Right.
Because this is eternal. It doesn't die. It doesn't come into being. It doesn't die. And yet all forms within it come into being and have their arc.
Yeah.
Seems to me that what I'm seeing is that, as far as I can take them all to so far, the last few minutes, all forms of dimensionality are, at least in my case, are related to the field of vision, to the sense of vision. There's breadth and distance and the vanishing point and all of the restrictions, all of the Maya, for me, and the scary things are related to confines and claustrophobia. All these things are superimposed on the field of vision. The other senses don't seem to have any of that. And maybe that's because we're so involved with vision. But then when I try to look at any one of them individually, they're not there. The field of vision is, if I just take it as every man looking at the world, I see it divided up into squares and into the dimensions and so on. But if I make an effort, I really can't see those dimensions.
Right.
It's just experience.
Yeah.
And those dimensions are the thing that give rise to all of what I'm seeing, the confines, the lack of whatever you want, your restrictions in all sense.
Yeah.
And also kind of a claustrophobic, it's not big enough, it's closing in on me.
Right. Yeah.
And the whole schmear.
Right.
it's really lines in the water,
Right.
superimposed on something that doesn't have that dimensionality.
Right. Yeah, it's applied by imagination. It's applied in the abstract by interpretation, conceptual interpretation, even if it's not consciously conceptual, but unconsciously. It's that kind of it's that quality of phenomena. And what's actually here is open-ended, is undefinable in its actual nature until the intelligence supplies the definition, supplies dimension, and then interprets these dimensions and has value judgments associated with them and so on.
Right, but the whole galaxy of value judgments to jump in there, of course. But I was thinking just the geometrical things even are incredibly limiting.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
In terms of perception, I don't see through those. But I just experimenting with them. I can see through them. They really aren't there.
Yeah.
If I take any one of those things and say, do I see any breadth here? No, it's just experience.
Right. Exactly so. And this is exactly the technique of noticing, of going to direct experience and being able to discriminate between that which turns it into faces and vases and that which just sees. And then in the context of just experience, what is it?
Right.
Then, so once you're not telling it what it is, and you can just be with the seeing, here's experience, I don't know what it is, and in that unknowing, what is it? Let it show you what it is. Show you its inherent aspects rather than these aspects that we superimpose over it imaginatively.
That's what I was trying to look at just experience and see what that was, and all of a sudden, all of these things were revealed.
Yeah.
All these structures were revealed, cutting experience up.
Yeah.
So now the question is, what is the experience itself?
Yeah. And the raw, naked experience is always present. We're always experiencing it. No matter how much we're conceptualizing it and thinking of it as being this or that, the undifferentiated real field is always present. Thought doesn't stop experience. Belief doesn't stop experience.
certain words are loaded. Like, my mind just grabbed when you said present. Some part of my mind grabbed, what does he mean by present? What does present mean? What does present mean?
What does present mean?
It's a loaded word.
Yeah. But it's ultimately the same koan as what is experience.
Yeah, the same thing.
Experience is that which is present.
Right. Which says very little.
Present is what experience is.
Right.
So they define each other. But you have to get to one or the other to get to the other.
Yeah.
And that's a really good koan. It's like, how is experience present?
Mm.
What is this present?
Right.
It's self-evident, but what is it exactly? And what is it that is present? In what manner is it present? How does it reveal the fact that it's present? What's the difference between what's present and what isn't present? Like yesterday or tomorrow are not present, but now is. How do I know that? What is this? What is it? What do I mean by that? What am I referred to when I say that? It's a very specific thing. But it's not a simple thing. It's not something that we can just, put in a sentence and say we've got it. It's infinitely subtle and mysterious, and it reveals reality itself. I mean, present is actually a synonym for real.
Yeah, but to me, real is more of an abstraction. It doesn't have any pizzazz to it. But present and experience, that's present, of course.
Yeah. But when you say real, reality, truth, sat, all of these kinds of words, whichever one, is a biggie for you, really turns out to be equals presence.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And so there's all these big, truth and being and isness and reality and God, and they're very big. But then present is just right here.
Right.
So what is this right here? What is this right here? It's very specific, but it's infinitely subtle. The entire spiritual quest could be boiled down to what is presence? What is present? I don't mean what as in the substance of it necessarily, just what is this presence? It's very manageable, so to speak, relatively, seemingly. Very immediate, very, it's right here. It's not, it's not the question, what is God, what is Shiva, it's just, what is this presence right here?
But in order to get there, you have to let go of so much.
Well, yes and no. It's right here. You don't have to get there even. You can ask that question from within any context, and you're still addressing the direct cutting edge. Mm-hmm. You can have the most baroque, complex worldview in the world, but still, this is present.
In fact,
it kind of cuts to the chase. Yeah, try to not be present.
If I try to understand that in human terms or in human logic, it seems to get blocked,
Well, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
That's the point. It pulls you right into direct noticing. It pulls you right into direct engagement with this reality. This is real.
Yeah.
This is the reality. This is not just real. This is it. This is the big shebang right here. This is what all the fuss is about. And asking what is present is right. That's it. That's the big question. That's the big cutting edge. And that opens to all of its implications, all of its nuance. It comes with. It's a package deal. You know, this presence is the tip of the iceberg of the infinite divine reality. And it's totally accessible. Presence is right here. Anyone can, like, what is presence? Just, yeah.
It seems to me that that letting go or that noticing happens naturally, and then somehow it also seems to me that I want to say after a certain amount of time, but that's not making sense to me. But somehow it seems to me that something kind of feels like, okay, that's it, that's enough, and whether that feels like it comes from a certain I don't know. I can say so many things about it, like uncomfortability again, or boredom, or something that maybe covers something else, or who knows. There seems to be this kind of like that's it, you know, and then it's more of a push rather than. And I think he spoke to me about that the other day, saying trying is not.
Yeah.
You know,
let go. Be easy.
Yeah. Trying not go. Yeah.
Yeah. Forcing it is not is counterproductive.
Yeah. Right.
Be easy. Let it do.
Let it show me. Like,
let it do, and when it stops
when
doing,
it occurs,
let it stop. When it drift off, let it drift off, because that's it doing too.
Right.
Trying to hold it to something is just locking it in,
right.
And the idea that you can lock it in is a pure fantasy. So right away you spin off into insanity.
So that actually is an idea. So I guess I didn't see that that's a subtle idea. That there was this kind of, that the trying, that there's this noticing that occurs naturally,
right.
And then there's maybe this subtle trying or something, or something happens, because it feels more forced, or, you know.
Yeah. Well, it may be, you know. But again, there's a maturing process that spontaneously develops as you become more sophisticated with noticing.
Yeah.
You know, at first you sort of you get it and like, wow, this is great, and then you're kind of a Nazi about it. Oh, I gotta notice now. I gotta notice. Oh, damn, I'm not noticing. Kind of thing. But then you develop more. It teaches you just the act of doing it. You learn, you know, just by a kind of a Pavlovian conditioning.
I've noticed
that it teaches you its own dynamism, and you learn what works and what doesn't. And what works the best is hands off. What works the best is letting it be what it is and go where it goes. And ultimately you discover that that's what everything is. Everything is it being what it is and going where it goes. Always. Always has been. And that is noticing, and then you just there's nothing but. So you don't need to be noticing to be noticing.
Yeah,
because it's nothing but noticing.
Right.
And discovering that is is the noticing with a capital N.
Right.
And in Dzogchen they have these notions like non-meditation.
Yeah.
Which is, and completely letting go.
Yeah.
Letting be, letting the mind be what it is and go where it goes. Completely hands off, as the highest form of meditation.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the highest form of meditation is non-meditation.
Yeah.
And the highest noticing is non-noticing.
Yeah. So the forcing, everything that happens, like everything that's going on, you know, like the noticing, then the forcing, then the noticing of the forcing, you know, like that whole whatever is happening.
Yeah, it's the learning curve of learning to trust just the natural flow
of whatever
of events, the natural flow of the Tao.
So I guess yeah. There's this idea, I guess, as you're saying, how it should be. Even if that's fine, like to notice that. But it's funny how it can feel like.
Well, the point is to establish a contact with that actual flow, a naked awareness of that actual flow. And having done that, then it itself will teach you what it is. And again, at first you'll have a naive, simplistic approach to it, and you'll want to force it, or you're trying to capture it, or you're trying to formalize it, or something. But eventually, it will teach you what it is and show you what it is, and it will teach you that its very nature is freedom, its very nature is unconstrained, and that it subsumes all things. Sure. It includes you, and this unconstrainedness is the absolute freedom of being. And as you see that more and more nakedly, you obviously dissolve into it, because you always were.
Right, of course. It's funny to think how that you can dissolve into it, and you always were, and it's very,
But again, it's a matter of noticing that you always were.
Yes,
And noticing what the actual condition actually is and has always been. It is what it has always been, and it has always been what it has always been. We just haven't noticed it. We've been busy thinking it's something else, holding it to be something else, and this is our torment. And we create ourselves and our lives and our world as this torture den of pain and suffering that exists only in our imagination. And all we need to do is notice what this actually is, and we discover it's not a torture den. It's not. There's no suffering. There's no you. There's just this astounding infinite flow of freedom and spectacular entertainment.
Yeah. It's very interesting that way.
Very interesting.
Yeah. It's amazing how it can appear as that pain and suffering or torture. It's very amazing how, and at the same time, it's always been the same way, and you were never, it dissolves. It's not what you think it was. So it's just amazing, I think, how it seems like it's simultaneously happening, but I don't know. It's just amazing to feel that pain or that constraint.
Well, it's very paradoxical to try and talk about, but one way to put it is to say that it is infinitely yielding, and it yields to itself. It yields to its own inherent intelligence. And it's its own inherent intelligence that sees it erroneously, that sees it as suffering, and it yields to that intelligence and appears as if it is that. And when its intelligence gets sophisticated and mature enough to begin to see itself as it is, it stops seeing itself as that, and so it stops appearing that way.
And it never was that way.
It never was that, because it's not any particular way. It's seeing it as any way that's the cause of suffering. It's not any way. It's literally, it's like a totally ambiguous, ghost-like wraith that is not anything in particular, but it's capable of seeing itself as something, and that's the fall. And that's the fall from. That's when you get kicked out of the Garden of Eden. You eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which is assessment, which means thinking things are something. The tree of life you're allowed to eat from. Life is just life isn't anything in particular. It's just this infinite flow. You eat from that, you can stay in the garden. You eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, i.e., differentiating objects, separation, seeing things as this or that, and bang.
You're out.
Starts history. You're out in the world. Very good math.
Very true.
the viewing intelligence supplies specificity.
And
The viewing intelligence supplies specificity, supplies definition, says what things are. Things themselves are completely open-ended. It's like people, when you know someone very simply, you have a simple judgment, you say, oh, that person is this, or that person is that. But if you look at what they actually are, there's no way you can say what they are. There's this field of just inconceivable possibilities and nuances and contradictions.
yeah.
So to see them as being this or that, simplistically and objectively, is an absurdity.
Right, yeah.
And yet, the whole world is like this, and yet we do it. We see the world as being this or that.
Yeah.
And in actuality, it's not. Our experience is just all these rainbow shades of ambiguity.
And we can notice that in real time. Like, we can notice
Yes.
that.
We can see that because it's the fact. It's the immediate fact.
Yeah.
It's the obvious fact. It's not an abstraction.
Yeah. It seems to me that when I was doing formal meditation for a certain amount of time, that it seemed to me like there wasn't exactly, I would just say, okay, I'm sitting to contact that or just to see reality. It seemed like there was a noticing that there was a certain flow, just so much happening in 1 second. Like there's so much going on, like this flow of whatever, like sensations and thoughts and images and all sorts of things. And it seemed like a useful, like a useful tool to contact that. And then I think I had this idea that I shouldn't kind of maybe like it's art, like it's a sort of a way, like a sort of not like that's not needed, like to just sit there and
Right.
set a certain amount of time to notice what's already happening all the time, anyways.
Yeah.
Sure. But possibly it could be useful anyway, just to sometimes if there's I don't know if
You can explore it. It's a vehicle for exploration.
Yeah.
But ultimately, the point of meditation is to outgrow it. The point of meditation is to learn you don't need to meditate it, because what is essential is already the case whether you're meditating or not.
Yes.
And to go to that.
Yes.
And going to that doesn't require meditating.
It's even
Or not
contact. Yeah.
It doesn't require being awake, doesn't require being asleep, doesn't require anything, because it's what's inherently always the case. And that turns out to be the important thing, is what's always already the case.
So you can take away from that. You can have like a layer or like a door. Yeah.
Well, you can't take away from it, but you can have a naive understanding that you can, and then you're approaching it through all these formulaic ways and techniques and manners, and I need to do this or else I won't be getting it, as opposed to all this kind of simplistic way of understanding it, which is appropriate at that phase of your exploration. But as you develop more subtlety and more ability to deal with it as it is, you learn its power and its inherence, and you learn to trust it and let go into it, rather than thinking you need to do something to bring it to you.
Yes. Or like clue in or tune in, because it was almost like, I got to contact reality or something like that. It wasn't even to get somewhere. Well, I guess it was a subtle, but I guess you're saying, I see what you mean. It's like it's not dependent and it's not specific.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, to that, to a sitting and to a certain amount of course.
Yeah. What it turns out, we ultimately discover that what is spiritually valuable is not dependent upon anything we do or don't do.
Yes,
whatsoever.
And that's huge,
It's absolutely huge. And then as we learn that we are it is unstoppable, it is eternal, and QED.
What is QED?
What's QED?
There's a question in the back.
QED? Fred? What is it?
What is it?
It's the initials of 3 Latin words, which is used at the end of a logical argument to as a statement that you have you've attained your logical goal.
I think it translates to that is it. Or something.
Well, I think what is desired? Quod est desiderata, or desiderum, or something. So it's literally that which is desired, or something. That which is wanted. I don't know. Not a Latin scholar. It's used in mathematics after you do a proof. You do the proof, and then when you've proved it, you go QED at the end.
Satisfying QED.
It's kind of like
done deal.
It's kind of like so there.
So there. So there. So there.
That's how we say it.
So there, suckers.
Seal of approval.
Sounds like you're getting back to what you were saying before, that reality is very yielding, and it will yield itself to whatever you're looking for.
Yes.
But
Exactly.
if I feel like I'm very confused, and then look at reality, which will unconfuse me because it will contrast with my confusion.
Yeah.
It yields to my confusion and becomes a very confusing thing.
Yes, exactly so. Yeah, it's like it can be said to be like a mirror that way.
So then I become a seeker, and I say, well, I'm looking for truth, and so it becomes very elusive and evasive.
Yes.
High climbing tree, and it needs to be sought out for eternity.
Exactly so. Yeah.
So it's very yielding.
Very accommodating.
Very accommodating.
So what I should do then is ask it to tell me what it is. There's
you become the yielding one.
there's an Indian story that often comes to mind. That seems to be really the essence of that Indian story. That there's a guy with a dye pot, and under a tree, and he dyes the claws of all these people, these primitive folks, and he would dye the cloth of anyone, and whatever they asked for. You want a green cloth? He dyed it in the same pot. He give it a green cloth and all that. So then the story goes that one little kid watched this all day and saw different colored claws coming out of this one pot, and he said, "Please dye my cloth the color of the dye in the pot." So I ask it to yield itself to me.
Right.
As it is. I'm not going to be confused. I'm
Yes.
not going to be anything. Let me know what it
Yes.
itself is. Since you're so yielding, please show me what you are. What is the color of the dye in your pot?
Yeah. Exactly so.
Mm.
We spend all of our lives telling it what it is. And of course it obliges. If we're fortunate, we get to develop the wit to ask it to show us what it is. What is it? What is this? What is this here? But it's subtle because we've been seduced into this mode of thinking we know what it is. It's so ingrained in us. It's difficult to trick ourselves out of that. Mm-hmm. Because we can, even if we try and do it very deliberately, we still are subtly in the mode of thinking we know what things are. To really be genuinely receptive and to really have absolutely no idea what this is the trick. And it may be a trick until you stumble upon it.
Well, even science has come to the point of realizing that the investigator projects onto the and contaminates the experiment with his own projection.
Peter?
Because there's no separate observer from the experiment. The observer and the experiment are one. So what this is and what I am are not two things. Mm-hmm. They're not insulated from each other. They're what I am and what this is just two ways of saying the same thing. So there's an inconceivable, overlap, interpenetration, so on.
I've been thinking this evening that if I feel myself, just the feeling of myself, then it's just this complete kind of like fuzzball of feeling. I mean, it's like, obviously there's nobody really there. It's just like, but if I look out of my eyes, when I use my vision sense, everything is so sharp, it's harder to see that just using your eyes. I mean, it seems like the field that you see out of your eyes is much sharper than the field you feel just, using your feeling, just in your interior sense of feeling. So I'm trying to look out of my eyes more and see what's actually there, because I know that field too, like, is changing, like you said earlier. It's fuzzy too.
Yeah. And again, our conceptual interpretation of what we're seeing is so subtly and subliminally and ubiquitously present with our seeing. So we're, even though we're seeing nakedly, it's simultaneously the intelligence is instantly saying what it's seeing, very directly and very automatically and unconsciously. So it's difficult to sort all that out and to not get just pulled into that whole snowballing process.
It seems much easier it seems much easier to just work with that sense of feeling.
Yeah. It doesn't matter what sense you work with, because what you'll find will be the same. You can work with sound, you can work with feeling, you can work with thought, you can work with taste, you can work with sight. Sight is very detailed and very precise, obviously, but the trick with sight is to really be very, very precise. Don't back up to the broad outlines, but really go into the detail. And you will find that the detail is where it starts to break down. The details where it gets fuzzy. It's like a higher resolution. You might think it's a higher resolution than a higher resolution readout than you're feeling or something, say.
Okay,
Maybe.
Yeah.
But at the level of the resolution, you find the same phenomena. You find that it's ambiguous and fuzzy.
At the fine resolution.
Yeah. I mean, look at any color. The color, if you look at it sort of in broad strokes, the color seems to be what it is. But when you go to the actual detail of what's actually present, as finely as you can perceive it, there's a lot of dynamism.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's good.
But you play with that. Look at look at that for yourself.
Because I've been pulling back from it and just looking at it like a big sort of easel without...
Yeah. Well, you can do that too. I mean, just see the field of vision as a field.
Right.
And so you're looking at the phenomena of vision rather than what is present as vision. But you can also look at what is present as vision, and you'll find the same. You'll ultimately discover the same thing, because of course they're one.
Right. Is the sense of fuzziness that I feel in my feeling, is that the same sense? Does that inhere also with what I see?
Yes.
That's what I thought.
Everything is absolutely indeterminate.
Right. So,
but you have to look very precise. It's not indeterminate you don't supply the indeterminacy by being vague and pulling back. You find the indeterminacy by being very precise and seeing what's actually there.
All right.
Go to the detail and you'll discover indeterminacy.
Right. But what I see here is also the inside feeling of what I see here is the same as the inside feeling that I supposedly feel in my body.
Absolutely.
So all this stuff is, the inside feeling of what I see is fuzzy, just like this.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's all one thing. There's only one thing happening here.
Right.
And it does not resolve itself. By its very nature, it does not resolve itself.
Yeah, you wouldn't even know where the border is.
This does not resolve itself. And when it's seeming to resolve itself into something, you're in an imaginary interpretation. You're not with the actual experience. If you really, really are present with the actual experience, you'll see that it does not resolve itself.
Right.
So if things don't appear to resolve themselves, you're really on a good track.
Yeah.
The complete opposite of what we hope will happen.
Yeah, right.
Right. So in a sense, we can always go to detail, to explore.
Absolutely. Go to what's really here. You don't take refuge in vagueness. Go to precision, and the inherent actual vagueness will reveal itself.
Yeah.
It's not a process of denial where you're saying, no, heck with specificity, here's some vagueness, let me smear it with vagueness.
Right.
It's like, no, I want reality, I want honesty, I want what's actually here. Let me go to it and see what's there, see what is actually here.
Yeah.
Just with absolute precision, with absolute transparency and presence, and see what I find. And do that, and look and see what you find.
Yeah. And that's the difference between having the experience and then intellectualizing the experience.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, really being there. I mean, putting your money where your mouth is, so to speak. Really, really go into experience and letting you say, show me what you are. Let me see what this actually is. It's like being scientific about it, being skeptical.
Right.
Just abandon. You may have your pet hypothesis. Just suspend them. Go to this and try and see what it actually is. With a great deal of neutrality and availability, and just really be with it and let it show you what it is. And what you will find is astounding. And on that note.